Is a former U.S. attorney and law professor at the University of Alabama. With me here in studio, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin and former Manhattan Assistant DA Catherine Christian. Joyce and Catherine are MSNBC legal analysts. So, Ken, because I understand there's already questions about the indictment itself, I want you to just lay out what do we know, what have you learned?
Yeah, there are, Chris. As you know, as we've been reporting all morning, Lindsay Halligan, the newly appointed U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, presented this indictment on her own, or presented the evidence seeking this indictment on her own to the grand jury. And she has no criminal experience. And now we're learning that the indictment itself, the way it's written, might be structurally unsound and might be liable to attack by the defense because it appears to quote Mr. Comey saying something that he did not say. It says that he falsely stated that, quote, he had not authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports regarding an FBI investigation concerning what the indictment calls person number one. Comey never actually said those words in this September 2020 hearing that's at issue. All he said in answer to Senator Ted Cruz's questions was, I stand by my 2017 testimony, in answer to a previous question from Senator Chuck Grassley. The quote comes from Senator Cruz's question, but in the indictment, it appears to put words in Comey's mouth. It's not clear exactly how much of a problem that would be, but at least legal experts are telling us that is an avenue that will allow the defense to attack this indictment on its face, Chris.
So, Joyce, how much of a problem could that be?
Well, the defense strategy will involve making an early motion to dismiss the indictment for deficiencies. And this is a big one. This 2020 exchange with Senator Cruz, which is the basis for the indictment, is really a statute of limitations extender. The statute of limitations for this crime is 5 years. So Comey's original testimony in 2017 is off limits. And so they've used this as a device. But Ken is correct to point out that this is not what Jim Comey said in 2020. It's what he said in 2017. The government will have to, at a minimum, amend its indictment to include the 2020 statement, perhaps exclusively, and then let a jury judge whether or not that constitutes a violation of the law. This is, I think, the first of many technical deficiencies we'll see with this indictment.
So, Lisa, let's talk about the indictment as it stands. The first thing that struck me, not a lawyer, how short it was, a page and a half, but walk us through it.
Well, there are some other interesting features about it.
Interesting? It's an interesting word.
Yeah. Not only is it only a page and a half, but it talks about a person one and a person three, and there is a person two that is missing. We don't know who person two is, although we assume that person two is someone who is referred to in the third charge that the grand jury failed to indict on. But there are two counts here, as you know. One is for false statements to Congress. The other is for obstruction of Congress. The false statement charge, as Ken was just laying out, has to do with their alleging that Comey willfully and knowingly made a materially false statement by falsely stating during that September 30th, 2020 Judiciary Committee hearing that he had not authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports regarding an FBI investigation concerning person one. That statement was false, it says, because Comey knew that he had in fact authorized person three to serve as an anonymous source in news reporting regarding the FBI investigation of person one. We believe that person one here is Hillary Clinton. We also believe that person three here is Andrew McCabe. Those facts have not been confirmed or verified by law enforcement or by MSNBC. The second count is a lot more nebulous than that, Chris. It's an obstruction of a congressional proceeding, just saying at that same hearing that Comey did corruptly endeavor to influence, obstruct, and impede the due and proper exercise of the power of inquiry under which the Senate Judiciary Committee was conducting an investigation by making false and misleading statements before that committee. That's the kind of charge that I think would lead to something called a motion for a bill of particulars. It doesn't say which are the false and misleading statements there that he so-called corruptly endeavored to influence, obstruct, and impede. They're going to have to specify which statements they're talking about there with respect to that obstruction of Congress charge.
Okay, Catherine, we can talk about who might be person one and person three, but here's what we know. An Inspector General report that looked at this way back in 2018 questioned whether Andrew McCabe, the person who claimed that Comey authorized the leak, was telling the truth. If it does go to court and Comey says bring it on, does it potentially become a he said, he said?
Well, that's exactly what it will be. Now, that Inspector General's report is the opinion of that Inspector General. That does not mean it's factual. But it's clear that there is this alleged contradiction between what Mr. McCabe said and what Mr. Comey said. So it will be that straightforward. And it's also one of the reasons why this probably should have never been presented to a grand jury. How will you ever prove this beyond a reasonable doubt?
Do you see this as the case we talk about all the time? I quote this on the show at least once a week, and so do many others. Grand juries will indict a ham sandwich.
Yes
Were you
and
surprised
no.
the indictment happened?
Yes and no, because they declined to indict another count that was presented to them,
the third,
where Mr. Comey allegedly didn't remember. And they said, we're not going to, indict him for making a false statement when he actually said he didn't remember. So they did at least not give the prosecutors everything they wanted, but it is an indictment.
So, Joyce, you heard what the president said. He says he hopes other people get indicted, and he posted earlier today that Comey needs to pay a big price for allegedly lying. Does that sound like someone who understands a big part of this defense may be that it's all about retribution?
So that'll materialize, I think, in the form of motions for selective and vindictive prosecution. That's a strategy a lot of defense lawyers try, particularly in political cases, and they almost never work. The crux of the argument is that the defendant was targeted, in this case, for political reasons, perhaps when no other defendant would have been targeted, or as retaliation for trying to exercise his constitutional rights. And Donald Trump is rapidly setting this up to be the case where if ever these motions work, they will. Because normally the government prevails on a presumption of regularity, that the government conducts itself according to the rules and behaves properly inside of the grand jury and at other phases during the case. And now Donald Trump is really, blowing that sort of a presumption out of the water. Chris, something I think it's important for our viewers to understand here is that when Donald Trump talks about weaponization of the Department of Justice during Joe Biden's tenure, he's not talking about Joe Biden, a president, telling the Justice Department to indict, for instance, Donald Trump. In fact, Joe Biden's Justice Department was about 180 degrees from that. They appointed a special counsel who had independence to make those decisions. Joe Biden didn't influence them. In fact, a special counsel was appointed to investigate Joe Biden himself and to prosecute his son, Hunter. So when we're talking about weaponization, that's happening when Donald Trump tells the Justice Department what to do. And he's making this sort of false equation between the behaviors of the two administrations.
So, Ken, this morning, FBI Director Kash Patel pushed back on the idea that Trump ordered these charges to be brought. He said, quote, career FBI agents, intel analysts and staff led the investigation into Comey and others. They called the balls and strikes and will continue to do so. Does that match what you've been hearing from your sources inside DOJ?
Well, that's not really how this works. Yes, it's true that career FBI agents helped investigate this case, but their job is to gather the facts. They present them to prosecutors, and particularly in a case like this, when you're talking about a false statements charge, a lot hinges on the legal analysis and whether prosecutors believe they can prove that James Comey knowingly lied to Congress. And that's really not on the FBI agents who investigated the case. That's really more on the prosecutors to decide whether the case is worth pursuing. And we know that career prosecutors in that office decided that it wasn't. And they wrote a memo saying that to Lindsey Halligan. And we know that the previous U.S. attorney also concluded in that direction, and he was forced out of office.